Sarah Martinez had never imagined that a simple job at the local shooting range would change her entire life. She was 23 years old, fresh out of college with a degree in business management, and desperately needed work to pay off her student loans. The precision point shooting range in San Diego wasn't exactly what she had pictured for her first career move, but it paid the bills. Her job was straightforward enough. She worked behind the counter, checking people in, renting out equipment, and making sure everyone followed the safety rules. But what really caught her attention was the target adjustment system. Every time someone finished shooting, she had to walk down the range and replace the paper targets, adjust the distances, and make sure everything was set up perfectly for the next shooter. At first, Sarah found the work tedious. Walking back and forth, carrying stacks of paper targets, and dealing with the constant noise of gunfire made her head pound by the end of each shift. But as weeks turned into months, something strange began to happen. She started paying attention to the targets themselves. Sarah noticed patterns in how different shooters performed. Some people could barely hit the outer rings of the target, while others clustered their shots near the center. She began to study the bullet holes, measuring distances between shots and calculating accuracy percentages in her head. It became a fascinating puzzle that made her work feel less monotonous. The range attracted all kinds of people. There were weekend warriors who came in with expensive equipment, but couldn't shoot straight to save their lives. There were police officers practicing for their qualification tests, looking serious and focused. There were elderly men who had been shooting since they were boys, moving with practiced ease as they handled their firearms. But the group that intrigued Sarah the most was the military personnel. They came in wearing civilian clothes, but she could always tell who they were. They moved differently, spoke differently, and shot differently. Their targets looked like works of art when she collected them, with tight groupings of holes clustered right in the center. One particular afternoon, a group of Navy SEALs came in for what seemed like a routine training session. Sarah had seen military groups before, but these men carried themselves with an intensity she hadn't encountered. They were quiet, professional, and completely focused on their shooting. She watched them from behind the counter, fascinated by their methodical approach to everything they did. The range officer that day was Mike Thompson, a former Marine who had been working at Precision Point for over 10 years. Mike knew Sarah had been showing unusual interest in the shooting aspects of the job, often asking questions about different firearms and ammunition types. He had noticed her studying the targets with the kind of attention most people reserved for important documents. During a lull in the afternoon, Mike approached Sarah with an observation that would prove to be more significant than either of them realized at the time. He mentioned that she seemed to have developed an eye for accuracy and precision that most people never acquired, even after years of exposure to shooting sports. Sarah admitted that she had become fascinated by the science behind marksmanship. She had been reading about ballistics, studying wind factors, and even researching breathing techniques that competitive shooters used. Mike was surprised by the depth of her knowledge, especially considering she had never actually fired a weapon herself. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion at one of the shooting lanes. One of the Navy SEALs was having trouble with his rifle scope, and his shots were consistently hitting low and to the right. Sarah watched as the man tried various adjustments, growing visibly frustrated with each failed attempt to zero his weapon properly. Mike walked over to assist, and Sarah found herself following. Drawn by curiosity about the technical problem, the SEAL explained that his scope had been knocked out of alignment during transport, and he couldn't seem to get it back to where it needed to be. Time was running short for their training session, and accurate shots were crucial for the qualification they were working toward. As Sarah listened to the discussion about MOA adjustments, elevation corrections, and windage compensations, she found herself visualizing the mathematical relationships involved. The concepts clicked in her mind like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. Without really thinking about it, she stepped closer to examine the target they had been using. The pattern of shots told a clear story to her trained eye. Based on the consistent grouping and the direction of the misses, she could see exactly what needed to be adjusted. The solution seemed obvious, but she hesitated to speak up. After all, she was just the person who changed targets, not someone qualified to advise Navy SEALs on marksmanship. But as she watched the SEAL grow more frustrated and Mike struggle to help him find the problem, Sarah realized that her months of studying targets and reading about shooting techniques might actually be useful. She took a deep breath and prepared to make a suggestion that would set in motion a series of events she never could have anticipated. Sarah cleared her throat nervously and stepped forward. The Navy SEAL, whose name tag read Rodriguez, looked up from his rifle with a mixture of surprise and mild irritation. He was clearly not expecting advice from the range employee who usually just collected targets and swept up brass casings. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I've been watching your shot pattern, and I think I might see what's happening." She pointed to the target they had retrieved from the 100-yard line. "Your grouping is really tight, which means your technique is solid, but every shot is hitting exactly 2 inches low and 1 inch to the right." Rodriguez exchanged glances with his teammates who had gathered around to see what was causing the delay. Mike Thompson stepped closer, curious to hear what Sarah had observed. She had never spoken up about shooting problems before, but he had noticed her analytical approach to everything she did at the range. "Look at this pattern," Sarah continued, gaining confidence as she explained her thinking. "If it was a flinching problem or inconsistent hold, the shots would be scattered. But this grouping is perfect, just in the wrong place. That tells me your scope is off by exactly those measurements. 2 clicks up for elevation and 1 click right for windage should put you dead center." The other SEALs looked skeptical. One of them, a tall man with graying temples, crossed his arms and shook his head. "We've been doing this for years, miss. Rodriguez has tried every combination of adjustments you can think of." But Rodriguez himself seemed intrigued by Sarah's analysis. He had been making random adjustments, trying different combinations without a systematic approach. Her explanation made mathematical sense, and he found himself wanting to test her theory. "What makes you so sure about those exact measurements?" he asked. Sarah felt her cheeks flush, but she pressed on. "I've been studying every target that comes through here for months. I started keeping track of patterns, measuring shot groups, and reading everything I could find about ballistics. Your shots are forming a perfect triangle that's offset from the bullseye by those exact distances. The consistency tells me it's purely a mechanical adjustment issue." Mike Thompson nodded slowly. He had seen Sarah's notebooks filled with measurements and calculations, though he hadn't realized how detailed her analysis had become. "She's been like a sponge for this stuff," he told the SEALs. "Reads shooting magazines during breaks, asks questions about every gun that comes through here." Rodriguez made the adjustment Sarah had suggested, carefully clicking his scope 2 notches up and 1 to the right. He loaded a fresh magazine and settled into his shooting position. The range fell quiet as he fired a 3-shot group at the target. When they called the target back, all 3 bullets had struck within an inch of the bullseye center. The skeptical SEAL with gray temples whistled low under his breath. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "How did you see that when we couldn't?" Sarah explained that she had been unconsciously developing a system for reading targets over the months she had been working at the range. She had started noticing that certain types of errors created predictable patterns, and mechanical problems with equipment produced different signatures than human errors in shooting technique. Rodriguez fired another group, this time achieving an even tighter cluster right in the center of the target. His teammates were impressed, not just with the shooting but with Sarah's ability to diagnose the problem so quickly and accurately. They began asking her questions about other aspects of marksmanship, testing her knowledge. The questions came rapidly. What about shooting in crosswinds? How do you compensate for different ammunition weights? What's the effect of barrel heating on accuracy? Sarah found herself answering with confidence, drawing on months of study and observation. Her responses showed not just book knowledge but practical understanding of how theoretical concepts applied to real shooting situations. As the conversation continued, one of the younger SEALs mentioned that they were always looking for people who understood precision shooting, especially for training and support roles. The comment was made casually, but Sarah caught the implication. These men were part of an elite military unit that relied on exceptional marksmanship for their missions. Rodriguez cleaned his rifle and packed his equipment, but before leaving, He turned to Sarah with a thoughtful expression. "You've got a real gift for this. Have you ever actually shot before, or is this all theoretical knowledge?" Sarah admitted that she had never fired a gun in her life. Her knowledge came entirely from observation, study, and analysis. This revelation stunned the SEALs even more than her accurate diagnosis of the scope problem. The idea that someone could develop such deep understanding without hands-on experience challenged their assumptions about how marksmanship skills were acquired. The gray-haired SEAL introduced himself as Chief Petty Officer Williams. He explained that in 20 years of military service, he had never met someone who could read targets with such precision without being a shooter themselves. He asked Sarah if she had ever considered putting her analytical skills to a practical test. Sarah's heart began racing as she realized what he might be suggesting. The thought of actually firing a weapon was both terrifying and exciting. She had spent months studying the theory, but the idea of applying that knowledge practically had never seemed like a real possibility. Williams looked at his watch and then at his teammates. They still had range time remaining, and their curiosity about Sarah's abilities was clearly piqued. He made a decision that would prove to be a turning point in Sarah's life, though none of them knew it at the time. Chief Petty Officer Williams made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He looked at Sarah with genuine curiosity and said, "Would you like to try shooting Rodriguez's rifle? I'm interested to see if your theoretical knowledge translates to practical application." Sarah felt her stomach flip. The idea of actually firing a weapon was overwhelming, but the opportunity to test everything she had learned was irresistible. She looked at Mike Thompson, who nodded his approval. As the range safety officer, he was confident that with proper supervision, there would be no safety issues. Rodriguez stepped forward and began explaining the basics of rifle operation. He showed Sarah how to hold the weapon properly, where to place her hands, and how to align her body for stability. The rifle felt heavier than she had expected, but somehow familiar in her hands, as if all those months of watching others had prepared her muscles for the weight and balance. "The most important thing is breathing," Rodriguez explained. "Take a deep breath, let half of it out, then hold and squeeze the trigger slowly." He demonstrated the technique, his movements smooth and practiced. "Don't jerk the trigger. Think of it like squeezing a sponge, steady pressure until it breaks." Sarah nodded, absorbing every detail. The theoretical knowledge she had gained from reading suddenly took on new meaning as she felt the mechanics of the rifle in her hands. The scope picture she had heard described so many times was now something she could actually see through the optics. Williams set up a target at 50 yards, a distance he considered reasonable for a complete beginner. The other SEALs gathered behind the shooting line, their skepticism mixed with genuine curiosity. They had seen plenty of people shoot for the first time, and the results were usually pretty embarrassing. Sarah settled into the shooting position Rodriguez had taught her, trying to remember everything she had observed over the past months. She placed the rifle butt firmly against her shoulder, wrapped her fingers around the grip, and peered through the scope. The crosshairs wavered slightly as she tried to hold the rifle steady, but she forced herself to relax and let her breathing settle. "Take your time," Rodriguez said quietly. "There's no rush. Just focus on the fundamentals we talked about." Through the scope, Sarah could see the black circle of the target clearly. She aligned the crosshairs with the center, just as she had watched hundreds of other shooters do. Her heart was pounding, but she tried to control her breathing the way she had read about in countless articles. Inhale, exhale halfway, hold, squeeze. The rifle kicked against her shoulder harder than she had expected, and the sound was louder despite her ear protection. But through the scope, she could see that she had hit the target. The bullet hole appeared in the white area outside the black bullseye, but it was on the target, which was better than many first-time shooters managed. "Not bad for a first shot," Williams said, examining the target through his binoculars. "You're about 3 inches high and 2 inches left of center. That's actually pretty impressive for someone who's never pulled a trigger before." Sarah felt a mixture of disappointment and excitement. She had hit the target, which was good, but she wanted to do better. All her studying and analysis had made her ambitious about accuracy. She asked Rodriguez if she could try again, this time trying to apply what she had learned from that first shot. Remember what you told me about my scope problem? Rodriguez said with a smile. Same principle applies to your shooting. That first shot gave you information. What do you think it's telling you? Sarah thought about the question, applying her target reading skills to her own shooting. If the shot went high and left, she needed to adjust her aim point low and right by the same amount. It was the same mathematical relationship she had identified with Rodriguez's scope, just applied in reverse. She settled back into position, this time feeling more confident about the rifle's weight and balance. The scope picture seemed clearer, and her breathing felt more controlled. She adjusted her aim point to compensate for the first shot's impact, took her breath, and squeezed the trigger again. This shot hit much closer to the center, landing just outside the black bullseye. The SEALs exchanged impressed looks. It was unusual for anyone to make such a significant improvement from their first to second shot, especially without additional instruction. That's some fast learning, Williams commented. Most people need dozens of shots before they start making corrections like that. Sarah was beginning to understand why she had been so drawn to studying marksmanship. There was something deeply satisfying about the precision and predictability of it. Unlike many other skills, shooting rewarded careful analysis and systematic thinking. Every shot provided data that could be used to improve the next one. Rodriguez offered to let her fire a full 5-shot group to see what kind of consistency she could achieve. Sarah accepted eagerly, now feeling genuinely excited rather than nervous. She had found something that combined her love of problem-solving with a practical skill that demanded both mental and physical precision. As she prepared for her third shot, Sarah realized that all those months of watching, studying, and analyzing had given her something unexpected. She wasn't just learning to shoot. She was discovering that she had a natural aptitude for precision that had been waiting for the right opportunity to emerge. The next 3 shots would tell her, and the watching Navy SEALs, whether her success was beginner's luck or the beginning of something much more significant. Sarah settled into her shooting position, completely focused on applying everything she had learned in the most important test of her life. Sarah's third shot landed squarely in the black bullseye just slightly left of center. The fourth shot hit even closer to the middle. By now the SEALs had stopped their casual conversation and were watching with serious interest. What they were seeing defied their experience with new shooters. As Sarah prepared for her 5th and final shot, she felt a strange calmness settle over her. All the nervous energy from her first attempts had transformed into focused concentration. She could feel her heartbeat, control her breathing, and sense the exact moment when the rifle was perfectly aligned. When she squeezed the trigger, she knew before looking that it was her best shot yet. The bullet struck dead center in the bullseye. Williams lowered his binoculars and stared at Sarah with an expression of disbelief. In his 20 years of military service, he had never seen a complete beginner shoot a group like that. Most trained soldiers couldn't achieve that level of accuracy without considerable practice. "Bring that target up here," Williams called to Mike Thompson. When the target arrived, the 5 bullet holes formed a tight cluster with 4 of them inside the black bullseye and the other just barely outside. The group measured less than 3 inches across, which was remarkable shooting for someone holding a rifle for the first time. Rodriguez examined the target carefully, shaking his head in amazement. "This is impossible," he said. "I've trained hundreds of new shooters and nobody shoots groups like this without months of practice. Are you sure you've never fired a gun before?" Sarah confirmed that this was indeed her first time shooting anything. She explained that she had spent countless hours studying the targets of expert shooters, analyzing their techniques, and learning about the physics of ballistics. But until today, it had all been theoretical knowledge. The youngest member of the SEAL team, a petty officer named Jackson, suggested that Sarah's success might be due to her analytical approach. "Most people try to learn shooting by feel," he said, "but she's been studying it like a science. Maybe that gives her an advantage over people who just wing it." Williams was intrigued by this theory. He had noticed that some of the best snipers in the military were people who approached marksmanship as a technical discipline rather than just a physical skill. They understood the mathematics of ballistics, the effects of environmental conditions, and the importance of consistent technique. "I want to try something," Williams said. He set up a new target at 100 yards, twice the distance Sarah had been shooting. "Let's see if your beginner's luck holds up when we make things more challenging." Sarah felt her confidence waver, slightly. 100 yards seemed like a huge distance, and she knew that even small errors in technique would be magnified at that range. But her curiosity was stronger than her apprehension. She wanted to know if her shooting was truly skill, or just coincidence. The rifle felt familiar in her hands now, and Sarah settled into her shooting position with growing confidence. Through the scope, the target looked much smaller at 100 yards, but she could still see it clearly. She applied the same systematic approach that had worked at 50 yards, focusing on breathing, sight alignment, and trigger control. Her first shot at the longer distance hit the outer ring of the target, which was still considered good shooting for the range. But Sarah wasn't satisfied. She analyzed where the bullet had struck and made a mental adjustment for her second shot. This one landed closer to the center. By her third shot, Sarah was beginning to understand how wind conditions affected bullet flight at longer distances. She had read about these effects, but experiencing them firsthand gave her practical knowledge that no amount of studying could provide. Her fourth and fifth shots both struck well within the bullseye area. The SEALs were now openly amazed by what they were witnessing. Williams called the target back and examined the grouping with professional interest. Sarah had shot a group that many experienced marksmen would be proud of, and she had done it on her first day behind a rifle. "I need to make a phone call," Williams said, pulling out his cell phone. He walked a few steps away and began speaking in low tones to someone. Sarah couldn't hear the conversation, but she caught fragments about natural talent and unusual situation. Rodriguez approached Sarah while Williams was on the phone. "I have to ask," he said. "What are your plans? Are you going to stay here at the range, or do you have other career goals?" Sarah admitted that working at the shooting range had been a temporary job, while she figured out what to do with her business degree. She had been applying for office jobs and considering graduate school, but nothing had really excited her. Until today, she hadn't realized that marksmanship could be more than just a hobby or job requirement. Williams returned from his phone call with a thoughtful expression. He looked at Sarah for a long moment before speaking. "I just talked to my commanding officer about you. We're always looking for people with exceptional shooting ability, especially for specialized training roles. Would you be interested in hearing about some opportunities?" Sarah's heart began racing again, but this time with excitement rather than nervousness. The possibility that her newfound skill could lead to a real career opportunity was overwhelming. She had come to work that day, expecting nothing more than another routine shift at the range. "What kind of opportunities?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Williams explained that the military had various positions for civilian marksmanship instructors and training specialists. There were also opportunities in law enforcement and private security that required advanced shooting skills. But he was most interested in her potential for even more specialized roles that he couldn't discuss in detail at a public shooting range. As the SEALs packed up their equipment to leave, Williams handed Sarah his business card. "Think about what I've said. If you're interested in exploring this further, give me a call. But I should warn you that any training program would be extremely demanding, both physically and mentally." Sarah took the card, studying the official Navy SEAL and contact information. She realized that her life had just taken an unexpected turn, all because she had been curious enough to study targets and brave enough to speak up when she saw a problem that needed solving. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, standing outside a nondescript building with Williams's business card in her sweaty palm. She had called the number he gave her, gone through several phone interviews, and somehow found herself being invited to what Williams had described as an informal evaluation. The building looked ordinary from the outside, but inside, Sarah discovered one of the most advanced shooting facilities she had ever seen. The range extended to distances she hadn't known were possible for indoor shooting, and the equipment was unlike anything at Precision Point. Everything was designed for absolute precision and maximum challenge. Williams met her at the entrance, along with 2 other men she hadn't met before. One introduced himself as Master Chief Peterson, a veteran sniper instructor with over 15 years of experience training military marksmen. The other was Dr. James Chen, a sports psychologist, who worked with elite military units on mental performance training. "We want to see if your performance at the range was a fluke, or if you really have the potential we think you do," Williams explained. "This evaluation will be more demanding than anything you've experienced before. Are you ready for that?" Sarah nodded, though she felt far from ready. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of research and preparation. She had read everything she could find about advanced marksmanship techniques, studied military shooting manuals, and even practiced meditation to improve her mental focus. Master Chief Peterson led her to the first shooting position, where a precision rifle was waiting. It was similar to the one Rodriguez had let her use, but clearly more advanced and expensive. "We're going to start at 200 yards, he said. "The target will be smaller than what you're used to, and we'll be measuring your shots to the 1/10 of an inch." The first stage of the evaluation went better than Sarah had dared hope. Her months of studying targets and her natural analytical approach served her well. She shot consistent groups that impressed the evaluators, though she could tell they were still reserving judgment about her abilities. The second stage was more challenging. Peterson moved the targets to 300 yards and introduced wind conditions using large fans positioned around the range. Sarah had to learn quickly how to read wind flags and adjust her shots accordingly. Her business degree had taught her to analyze systems and variables, and she approached wind reading the same way. "Interesting technique," Dr. Chen observed as he watched Sarah study the wind flags for several minutes before each shot. "Most people try to shoot fast and adjust on the fly. She's treating each shot like a separate problem to be solved." By the third stage, Sarah was shooting at 400 yards in variable lighting conditions. Some targets were brightly lit, while others were in shadow, forcing her to adjust her scope settings and shooting technique. This was where her months of observation at the range really paid off. She had watched shooters deal with similar challenges and had unconsciously absorbed solutions to problems she was now facing herself. The final stage was what Peterson called the stress test. Sarah had to shoot while being timed, with loud noises playing through speakers and while performing physical exercises between shots. This was designed to simulate the pressure and physical demands of real-world shooting situations. As Sarah completed the evaluation, she was exhausted, but exhilarated. The shooting had been challenging, but every stage had felt like a puzzle, to be solved rather than an impossible task. Her analytical mindset had served her well throughout the day. Williams, Peterson, and Dr. Chen huddled together to review her performance while Sarah waited nervously. She could see them examining her targets and discussing her scores, but their expressions gave nothing away. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, they approached her with serious expressions. "Sarah," Williams began, "in 30 years of evaluating shooters, I've never seen anything quite like your performance today. Your scores would qualify you for advanced military sniper training, which is remarkable considering you'd never held a rifle a month ago." Master Chief Peterson nodded in agreement. "Your technical approach to shooting is exactly what we look for in precision marksmen. You don't just shoot well, you understand why you shoot well. That's a rare combination." Dr. Chen added his perspective from the psychological side. "Your ability to maintain focus under pressure and systematically solve problems is exceptional. These are qualities that can't be taught easily, but they can be developed in people who have natural aptitude." Williams pulled out a folder with official-looking documents. "We'd like to offer you a position in a specialized training program. It's a civilian contractor role, but you'd be working directly with military units on advanced marksmanship training. The program is intense, but if you complete it successfully, you'd be qualified for some very interesting opportunities." Sarah looked at the documents, trying to process what was happening. A month ago, she had been a recent college graduate working at a shooting range to pay bills. Now she was being offered a chance to join an elite training program that could lead to a completely different career path. "What exactly would this training involve?" she asked, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Peterson explained that the program would last 6 months and would cover every aspect of precision shooting, from basic marksmanship to advanced techniques used by military snipers. She would learn about different weapon systems, ballistics calculations, camouflage and concealment, and fieldcraft skills. But I should be clear, Williams added, this isn't just about shooting. You'd be training to become an instructor yourself, teaching these skills to others. That means you need to not only master the techniques but understand them well enough to pass them on. Sarah realized that this opportunity was exactly what she had been unconsciously preparing for during all those months at the range. Her love of analysis, her fascination with precision, and her natural teaching instincts all seemed to point toward this path. She looked at the three men who were offering to change her life and made a decision that would define her future in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Sarah signed the documents that day, and 6 months later, she graduated at the top of her class from the most demanding marksmanship program in the country. The training had pushed her to limits she didn't know she possessed, both physically and mentally. She had learned to shoot accurately in conditions that would have seemed impossible when she was adjusting targets at precision point. The program had covered everything from basic rifle maintenance to advanced ballistics calculations that required complex mathematical formulas. Sarah had studied weather patterns, learned to estimate distances by eye, and mastered camouflage techniques that could make her invisible in various terrains. But most importantly, she had learned to teach these skills to others. Her first assignment was at a military training facility in Virginia, where she would be instructing Navy SEALs in advanced precision shooting techniques. It was a role that would have seemed impossible to imagine a year earlier, when she was just the young woman who changed targets and swept up brass casings. On her first day as an instructor, Sarah found herself facing a class of experienced military operators who had every reason to be skeptical of a civilian instructor, especially a young woman who looked like she belonged in a business office rather than on a shooting range. She could see the doubt in their eyes as she introduced herself. "I know what you're thinking," Sarah said, addressing the elephant in the room directly. "A year ago, I was thinking the same thing. I had never fired a gun in my life, and I was working at a local shooting range just trying to pay off my student loans." She told them about that afternoon when Rodriguez was having trouble with his rifle scope, and how a simple observation about target patterns had led to this moment. The SEALs listened with growing interest as she explained her journey from target adjuster to precision shooting instructor. "The reason I'm standing here today isn't because I'm naturally gifted," Sarah continued. "It's because I learned to see patterns that others miss, and to approach shooting as a systematic problem that can be solved with the right analysis and technique." She moved to the shooting line and picked up the same type of rifle that Rodriguez had been using that day. Without any warm-up shots, she fired a 5-round group at 200 yards that could be covered by a quarter. The class fell silent as they realized they were looking at shooting that exceeded even their own high standards. Over the following weeks, Sarah proved herself to be not just an exceptional marksman, but an innovative instructor. She brought fresh perspectives to traditional training methods, using her analytical background to help students understand the science behind accurate shooting. Her classes became some of the most requested at the facility. 6 months into her new career, Sarah received a visit from Chief Petty Officer Williams, who had been promoted since their first meeting. He came to observe her teaching and to discuss her next career phase. Williams was pleased but not surprised to learn that her students were achieving higher qualification scores than any previous class. "I have a proposition for you," Williams said after watching her conduct a training session. "We're establishing a new program to train civilian law enforcement snipers. It would mean traveling around the country, working with police departments to improve their tactical shooting capabilities. Interested?" Sarah didn't hesitate. The opportunity to expand her impact beyond military training appealed to her desire to make a broader difference. She accepted the position and spent the next 2 years developing training programs that were eventually adopted by police departments nationwide. Her reputation in the precision shooting community grew rapidly. Sarah began receiving invitations to speak at conferences, contribute to shooting publications, and consult with equipment manufacturers on new rifle and optics designs. She had become one of the most recognized names in tactical marksmanship training. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of her new career was the occasional opportunity to return to Precision Point, where Mike Thompson was still working as the range safety officer. He always greeted her with a mixture of pride and amazement, reminding her of how far she had traveled from those early days of adjusting targets. During one such visit, Sarah met a young man who reminded her of herself. He was working part-time at the range while finishing college, and she noticed him studying targets with the same analytical intensity she had once brought to the job. When she approached him to ask about his observations, his insights about shot patterns and shooting techniques impressed her immediately. Sarah realized that she was looking at someone who might have the same potential she had discovered in herself. She made a mental note to keep an eye on him, knowing that sometimes the most unlikely people possess extraordinary abilities that just need the right opportunity to emerge. As she left the range that day, Sarah reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her from target adjuster to nationally recognized marksmanship expert. It had all started with simple curiosity about the patterns she saw on paper targets and the courage to speak up. When she noticed something that trained professionals had missed, she had learned that expertise doesn't always come from traditional paths, and that sometimes the most valuable perspectives come from people who approach problems from completely different angles. Her success had been built on careful observation, systematic analysis, and the willingness to challenge assumptions about how skills are developed. Most importantly, Sarah had discovered that her greatest satisfaction came not from her own shooting achievements, but from helping others unlock their potential. Every student who improved under her guidance, every officer who qualified because of her training methods, and every life that might be saved because of better marksmanship skills represented the true measure of her success. The young woman who had once simply adjusted targets was now adjusting lives, careers, and capabilities in ways she never could have imagined. And it had all started with one Navy SEAL's rifle and the courage to offer help when help was needed.